Okay, so I was dealing with the best practice examples of developing and delivering on aquaculture course in direct response to industry demands. You recall? Huge title. So this ended up with a bunch of best practice examples of developing. Okay, I'm just gonna go through them. Many of them came back in different groups, so that makes me confident that indeed these are good ones. So I'll start with one of them, industry consultation. So if we, as a research as a research institute of a university, you can do kind of rounds on a regular basis with the industry representatives on what the industry needs and what can education offer, and then see where the needs are and how you can deal with that in your courses. Another thing is that the industry can deliver master thesis topics and even in some examples let the student use their facilities. This needs good control, which is logic, and is more for research-oriented education. There was even some institutes that link student allowance in return. So the industry pays for their master study in return for a thesis topic of their choice. I think that's a win-win. Blended learning courses in collaboration with transnational industry. There was this example of the Italian university and a Scottish company. So this I really like. I would take it along in my exchanges. Then we have short internships of 1 to 2 weeks. So not the typically long internships, but short ones, which can also be transnational. And then very important is that you let the company evaluate your students' skills afterwards. So then you know for your courses and when they are graduating, whether their skills are sufficient, not only in your country, but also in other countries, because aquaculture is international. More and more. What else do we have? Bachelor course evaluations, even every 3 years, and then curriculum development with feedback and from the industry and in cooperation with the industry, but also with government, research institutes, small and large-scale farms. So that way they can interact and give it another direction if needed. Then one thing that came up in every table, internships. They are very popular and they're evaluated very good, but overall too short. So the industry gives one big hint to us in the education facilities that you need to prolong those internships because you should cover at least one life cycle, which is logic, but not easy to combine with the other courses. There were very interesting thoughts about the industry paying for professorships, positions, full-time, part-times, and give the topic on what they should teach. They decide what topic that should be. So that's also a way to go. Industry PhDs. So a real problem, one from the industry is proposed and is translated in a PhD and can even be paid maybe for 50% by the industry. Works well. Design of custom developed short courses on topics demanded by the industry, going from 1 day to 1 week. So that came up a lot as well. And then interesting also meetings between groups of labs and groups of companies. So more than just one by one, but groups and groups to identify common interests and problems. And then another one to think about for us European countries is to allow foreign PhD candidates to do research on problems of their own countries and not of your own lab, which is most of the time the situation. Training given by large companies to their own employees to compensate for lacking skills. This is a special one, but that gives sign of the problem that exists. problems in industry, time spent, a certain problem in the industry, and time is spent directly in the class. So, or do you invite representatives of the industry into your classes to deal with certain hot topics? Industry visits, very popular. Feedback from the industry through a good network of your own alumni. Very important. Arrived almost in all groups. Training, I don't know I can't come up with the correct term in English, but not only training new students, but also train the ones that are already working. How do you call it in English? Bijscholing. Continuous education. Continuous professional development. I'm gonna write that down. We need to put more effort on the training of entrepreneurship. Even the development of a new bachelor based on the strong needs of the sector. That was the aquaculture engineering bachelor. And then also broader, to do not only site visits, but also region visits, to let the students understand the ecology of the country or the region, but also of the aquaculture sector. Seems very important to me, personally. And then with one group, I ended up to do even a more specific task, let me take it with me. How to establish industry contacts, the insights into the industry demands, and getting direct involvement of industry in teaching. And we had a couple of them. So again, the contact with the alumni came up there again. And then actively maintaining contact with industry, almost on a daily basis. So really put an effort in it by your personnel and allowing them to spend time on it. But then also confidentiality disclosure issues. So signing the confidentiality disclosure might solve some problems that are heard today because of the industry that is reluctant to share data and to share things. That's it. So the boring part is finished. Now I give you the very exciting part, and that's this guy. And then we will end in glory with John. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that on? No. Is that working? It is? Right. Okay. Thank you for my build-up. I'm glad you think I'm exciting. I'm not sure the topic is, but I'll try my best. We were asked to look at real-life challenges experienced by educators in trying to implement industry-responsive courses and how to address them. And I stupidly thought this would be quite an easy topic to take, but it proved to be a lot more complex and a lot more profound than a simple listing of case studies from 360-degree feedback that had been provided on industry courses, which is what I had thought it might be. I'll finish with a positive, and one of the last comments we heard from the final table was that industry and educators are successful when we work on equal terms, which I thought was a very succinct way of summing up the three tables talk. That's the succinct way. I'll now undo all of that by giving you all the work that got us to that point. And the idea of being successful when we worked together on equal terms begins the analogy of the bad marriage. So it was suggested that both educators and industry are codependent, but whilst we can't operate without each other, particularly given the applied nature of aquaculture education, the relationship is often dysfunctional. In order for that relationship to be more successful, it needs to be a symbiotic relationship to the benefit of each party, not a didactic or top-down relationship. And that might either be from industry to academia or academia in return to industry. There were a number of interesting sort of points that came up during conversation, and unfortunately I've not had a chance to order these into any sort of flowing narrative, which I will try to do before it gets put round you all. But to run through them, it was highlighted that there's we're on to quite profound stuff quite early on. There's a different concept of time between industry and aquaculture education. Industry wants an answer, if not at once, then yesterday. Academia operates in a much more cautious principle of peer review, proven research, and development over the long term. This concept of time and working methodology can be exacerbated by the standard operating procedures of academia, the way the system operates through, for example, the requirement of ongoing research, regular publication, and so forth, which can make industry-specific industry project work less appealing. Academics have been trained to approach problems in a different way. Industry are driven by time and the need to sell and to turn a profit. The academic approach is more to understand a problem. The industry approach is to fix it. And that can create a disconnect. Industry has become so complex and specialized now that the concept of a generic industry course has altered. And it was flagged up that there's both a need for the generalist and also a highly trained specialist. And in addition to that, feedback needs to be broader than just an aquaculture course, as aquaculture might also consist of aspects of engineering or genetics or management or administration or a number of different courses. The issue of trust is seen as key with regard to effective communication between the two parties for any positive influence in course content. And then we move on to further problems, the challenge of political interference. Now, this could either be as a real-life challenge. This could either be... there we go. Gosh, now that echoes a bit. It's always bad when the microphone judge goes against you, isn't it? The challenge of political interference, either explicitly, so examples were given of the situation in Cambodia or Myanmar, where there's been direct government interference with institutions, or in a slightly more passive political interference, for example, through the development of in the UK, the research assessment exercise, and the implications of the focus to be on publication to ensure institute ranking and funding derived thereby. Increasing trends for industry secrecy and non-cooperation can prove to be a barrier to progress. And this is further exacerbated by the industry drawing in on itself due to often undeserved negative publicity. There's perhaps an inherent conflict between commercial sensitivity and the desire on the part of academia to promote and celebrate the open sharing of knowledge. There are also many instances of farmers simply not listening, specifically with regard to small-scale farmers who think they know the best. And this situation, and it gives me great pleasure to say this as a man, is often exacerbated by pure sexism on the part of male farmers not listening to female academics. So I'll just take that for my gender and apologize to you all. There are differences between small farms and large farms. Certain companies taking the approach that anything academia can offer, they can do better through their own better resourced research facilities. And there are problems of poor communication and simply not listening. We had a wonderfully, an example of a vicious circle, what we call in English a vicious circle, demonstrated with one managing director of a large company who should know better, saying, don't tell me what I need, tell me how to do it. And the person in the room saying, well, what do you think I'm trying to do? But if you've got that fixed, closed mind, where do we tackle that? Give them a push into a pond, that's what I say. In terms of some general points, we didn't really highlight any differences between Europe and Southeast Asia. It seemed to be common problems and experiences across both regions. That being said, I find this fascinating. There are some special circumstances relating to ornamental and fighting fish in Southeast Asia, particularly with regard to a cult of secrecy. And this is a great expression that somebody used, the hocus pocus, which means magic. It's another word for magic, involved in the breeding of ornamental fish. That's an area of which I have no experience, but having heard about the amount of profit that can be made for it, I think we should all consider ornamental and fighting fish. And one case study was given of links with industry being weak in Myanmar, and curriculum development being influenced more by other universities, including, I'm happy to say, Wageningen, represented in the room today. We've got some concrete examples of real-life challenges. We have courses being refined through encounters developed through research projects and student projects. We have incidences, as Mika was pointing out, of guest lecturers and hired lecturers coming from industry. Am I going to try and compete with this or not? There are 50-50 funded master's courses and other placements being offered with government funding, government agencies or an industry, and those tend to be driven by the industry agenda or particular challenges the industry are facing. We had a couple of institutions whose curriculum committees or course committees do take 360-degree feedback. However, that review process tends to be influenced over 1 to 2 to even 5 years. So again, we're looking at a much longer timescale than the quick fix that perhaps some people in industry would expect. There seems to be greater emphasis on the applied and practical over simple lecturing. And we do have some case studies of technology being actively taken up by industry when it's been introduced to them by academia, with a couple of case studies being given in the Philippines and Norway. So as I say, that's a very rapid presentation of what we went through. I will look through that and try and put some of that into a slightly more flowing narrative for Marika. But thank you all very much for your contributions, because I very much enjoyed learning a lot of things. And what little money I have, I'm off to invest in fighting fish in Southeast Asia to make my fortune. So thank you very much for your time. And I should say something lovely about John now, because Mika picked it up. So no pressure, John, but we're all looking to you for the bravura finale to the interactive sessions.
Didn't really want to be the last person on, sort of holding you from the refreshments, sort of be starting out there, but this will be quite short because I didn't keep very good notes. So this is the question 3. How can aquaculture educators in Asia and Europe collaborate in their development of courses to respond to industry needs and to deliver the best employees for the aquaculture global sector? So that was our question, and started off with, if it can go, not going, is it not plugged in? Or? All right, thanks. So we started off just a little bit of an exploration of what were the benefits of collaborating between Europe and Asia. And those people who were coming from Asia to experience European education reflected a little bit on their experience and felt that one of the key things that they found quite different in Europe was learning to ask questions. European students tend to be much more questioning and are encouraged to be so by their lecturers. And they learnt quite a lot more about experimental discipline and lab culture in the labs and skills in the labs and things. So those were things that they particularly valued from their experience in Europe. Europeans, when they visited and studied or worked in Asia, found that the work ethic was something that they really was quite different and learnt from their experience there. And also the opportunities for development of practical and field skills, which often is lacking in Europe. So there were benefits from experiences both ways. And then aspects of collaboration, content of the courses, teaching methods, and then this culture and practice were the kind of key elements that we felt had to look at in terms of developing joint programs and things. It was also noted by another group that Asia is a very diverse place. We think that Europe's quite diverse, but not to the same extent that Asia can be. So we can't generalize too much in all of this. We then moved on to what are the benefits for industry of international collaborations and the internationalization of education. And felt that the people most likely to benefit was the companies that are supplying to the aquaculture sector or were downstream of the aquaculture sector that are involved in international trade and developing international businesses. That the involvement of students with this kind of perspective would enhance their competitiveness and would be attractive to them. And throughout the whole sector, including the aquaculture production sector, internationalized students would have better ability for innovation and better capacity for technology transfer and things. So there were benefits that could be perceived. And that staff with international competence would have generally better knowledge, communication skills, understanding and networks that could be useful to companies. So a lot of discussion about how do we develop these kind of collaborations, and we kept coming back to the idea of mobility as being absolutely core, and particularly the mobility of students. And there were some examples discussed several times. This one came up. There's a Japanese program in, is it tropical fisheries or fisheries science, which enables students from quite a few different Asian institutions to go to Japan for training, and that's opening up as well to, links between these institutions. And in Europe, we've got the Erasmus scheme, which funds a lot of student mobility. But it was noted that we think that the Erasmus funds does allow for Asian students to come into Europe, but we don't think it allows outgoing studentships in the same way, and that was something that we felt was ought to be addressed. Opportunities for staff mobility, this was felt to be quite useful in many cases, probably not as useful as student mobility, but potentially can be cheaper and can still have added value. And also it was suggested that staff should be encouraged and given the opportunities to go for short periods of time working in industry to better develop those kind of industry understanding and industry links. And that would benefit from some kind of recognition mechanism. Because at the moment, if that does happen, there's not really any kind of mechanism for that to be recognised and the teachers to be accredited in a sense for their extra ability and knowledge in that area. We talked a bit about the barriers to mobility, and these were things like the institutional culture and the management priorities in different institutions, which often stood in the way of people just going out there and doing things. Different academic timetables and course structures, which could inhibit the ability for different institutions to collaborate. Unharmonised educational structures, frameworks, making it difficult to sort of swap credit points and recognise prior qualifications. And lack of English language or other common language that would inhibit, again, students participating fully in another institution. Mechanisms for overcoming these were perceived as things like through better mutual recognition, promoting and funding networks of academic interest, and particularly funding and support for particular specific split centre and joint programmes. So I think we know the kind of things that this could be, but again, there's not very much sort of broader political funding and support for them. And then finally, we thought about opportunities for enhancing collaboration and cooperation through the use of technology. And we felt that there was greater opportunities for blended learning, the combination of online and face-to-face learning. We spoke quite a bit about sharing of materials, for instance, through the better use of open educational resources, or specific projects funding the development of collaborative materials that would enable the swapping of materials between Europe and Asia. And particularly useful would be things like case studies with associated exercises and audio-visual materials, etc. Suggested there might be more student-to-student contact and collaboration, e.g. through joint problem-based learning scenarios and exercises, which could involve students from two different institutions or even different courses, sort of different disciplines, if that can be done in a way which fits timing of the academic timetables. Suggested that we have promotion and collaboration between student societies where they exist at national and transnational levels. And then finally, the idea that we need to move beyond the idea of teaching materials just being text and pictures and lectures and maybe videos, and get more into gamification, the use of mobile apps, and virtual reality applications just really starting to come in. And that raised the idea that we could involve industry a lot more in the development of these things, because some industry is already well down the route in terms of developing virtual reality simulations of their equipment in use and that kind of thing. And there's also a lot of use or increasing use being made of big data. And if that could be contributed and developed into learning materials as well, we could have more exciting and interesting sort of simulation apps where students could do some virtual farming of fish online. They could feed their fish, they could look after their fish through online apps and things, which would all be both fun and also help to develop their understanding of critical issues as well. So getting more into this Generation Z that I think was spoken about earlier, and the things which would work with them. So that was it. So I'm just going to finish off by appealing for those of you who kind of contributed a lot of these ideas. It would be very useful for our Work Package 2 report if you could just fill in one of these templates. It's only maximum 2 pages, so quite short, just experiences that you've had with different types of collaboration between Europe and Asia in education. There's a folder that I've set up at that address, tinyurl.com, EURASTiP Work Package 2, and as an additional bonus to go there, there's some further material that might be useful to developing collaborations between Europe and Asia and with industry, and on things like employability. So we'd be grateful if you could do that in the next few days, hours, as soon as you can. Good. Okay, that's. Well, thank you very much.